I cannot believe that it is nearing the end of March already. My name is Hannah and I am back with another book wrap up of the books that I have read this past week or so, and let's jump into that. I read the book What I Carry by Jennifer Longo, and this follows our protagonist. She has been in foster care since she was born and she is getting close to aging out, and it follows her kind of last year of high school and her time with this new family, this new woman who has taken her in, and just kind of learning how to open up her heart and make friends and make lasting connections, even though she has gone through so many changes throughout her life. So this book had some really good parts. I thought the main character was easy to connect to. You really rooted for her. It had a lot of commentary on the foster care system. It wasn't just maybe a sensationalized worst case scenario of what could happen in the foster care system. It was just, you know, it's a lot of moving around, meeting new people, and trying to get used to things. And so maybe a little bit of a lighter view of foster care, and also a good commentary on adoption and what it means for the kids, and how a lot of times parents are like these couples are looking for a kid because they want a kid, not because the kid needs a home, and making sure that, you know, kids are in situations because it's what's best for them. And I thought there was some good commentary. This is very young adult, and honestly, I didn't think it was that great. It had some interesting commentary. I really appreciated it. The author had an author's note at the end of this book, and she talked about how she has a daughter who she had adopted and had been in foster care and wanted this story told and wanted a hopeful ending. And so it helped because that kind of made the book come together and make sense for me, because it was a little too, and everything's wonderful. So I mean, I thought everything got tied up a little too neatly in this book. While I did love the main character, I did think a lot of the supporting characters were very one-dimensional and very just, oh, we're here to support you and we love you, and didn't seem to have feelings or needs of their own apart from what would support the main character, you know? And so I found that to be a little off-putting. Specifically, there were a few instances in this book where it was set up that, oh no, I betrayed my friend's trust, or oh no, I lied to my friend, and then you expect there to be some sort of consequence or acknowledgement of that, and instead the book just kind of moves past it. It makes it seem like it's a big deal and then doesn't ever address it, where what I think the author was trying to do is show that, you know, making these mistakes isn't a big deal. People are still gonna love you regardless, and like you can make these lasting connections. I understand kind of that vibe, but I think that what it did was it made the secondary characters feel very flat, that they had no emotion or feeling of feeling betrayed by, oh, I asked you not to tell this person that I was being bullied and you did anyway, and now I feel betrayed. They don't have those feelings at all. And so I don't know if I necessarily recommend this book, just because it wasn't, I just don't think it was really well done. But if you are looking for maybe a different look into foster care and adoption and want it in a lightweight young adult type way, I think you might be interested in this one. I read the book The Groundbreaking: An American City and Its Search for Justice by Scott Ellsworth. And this, I think, was a recommendation from Brandon's bookshelf, so thanks for that. This was a very interesting book. This talks all about the Tulsa Race Massacre in the 1920s and the subsequent covering up of the massacre by the authorities in the town, and then uncovering the massacre and getting it out into the public. And then it follows the search for these mass grave sites. And so I think, like, subject matter wise, this is something people need to know about and you should look into. Like, it is horribly depressing. So the first like chapter or so is some of the most shocking and moving, emotionally difficult writing I think I've ever gotten through. It was just a description of what happened in the Tulsa massacre, and that was just horrible to read, just shocking to know that that actually happened, and it was only 100 years ago, and this happened. All these people who just lived their normal days suddenly could commit these atrocities. It was just horrific to read. The rest of it, I feel like there was a lot of important things that got brought up. I wrote down a couple, let's see, like the debate of reparations, the search for massive graves, and how to properly recognize and talk about those who have died in horrible things, and like there were lots of good things that were talked about. I think it would have been 5 stars for me if the last half of the book had been condensed a little, because it just kind of dragged. There were, it just was really hard for me to stay engaged in the last bit, and I understand it was going through any event of note in Tulsa from the 1920s until present time, as well as all the search for the mass graves and any of that. I feel like the most engaging part of the book was the first part, where it was the massacre, the covering up of the massacre, and the uncovering of it. Then the talk about reparations and the search for the bodies was important, but it did kind of drag. I just got annoyed because, okay, this is how every chapter went. Every couple pages it was, and this is Susie, and then the book author goes through and explains everything in the life of Susie and all of her qualifications, and then says, and this is how she contributed to the search. And then you turn the page and it's like, and this is Derek, and this is his whole life and all his qualifications and everything, and this is how he contributed to the search. And it started to kind of just drag for me at that point. But for events that need to be talked about more, I feel like the Tulsa Race Massacre is one that should be high up there, because it does bring up a lot of really important topics and questions that we need to talk about, like reparations. All these families, I mean, thousands of homes were destroyed. All that generational wealth is gone. So what are we going to do about it now? How are we going to address that? How are we going to heal these things when it has been years and years of tensions and problems that have been swept under the rug and not resolved? So like, I think this book brings up lots of interesting things. I do recommend it. I just think the last half, I just wish it had been condensed a little. It did drag a bit. Okay, I have filmed this portion of the video so many times because I am having the hardest time gathering my thoughts about the book Tin Man by Sarah Winman. Tin Man by Winman. I think this was recommended by its.erinnn, and she has a wonderful YouTube channel and fantastic book recommendations, so I'll link her down below. This is following 2 good friends who kind of turn into more over time, and then they lose touch in the next years, and when one of them comes back, the other one is married to a woman. So it explores Ellis and Michael and their relationship. It kind of jumps time periods a lot. So it talks about, I think it was Ellis's mother, and then it jumps to Ellis in the future. It talks when Michael is no longer there. It talks about Michael. Ellis finds Michael's journals, and it's all his journal entries. So there's a lot of kind of moving parts, and it talks a lot about different like LGBTQ relationships, and it talks a lot about the AIDS epidemic. It's told in that time period. So there are a lot of topics that I feel like are worth exploring in this book. I had a very difficult time, I feel like, really emotionally connecting to it, and I don't know if it was the fault of the book or if it was when I listened to this one. I didn't read. I listened to this book whilst making 100 cookies for a wedding. So I don't know if I was in the right headspace. So I honestly got a little confused about what was happening when, because of the time jumps and such. I feel like that can be very effective a lot when it kind of comes together, and I just feel like it lacked that for me. Maybe I was distracted. Maybe I should go back and read it as a actual physical book, and listening to it was a bad idea. I'm not sure. So if you've read this book, let me know. I do not know how to rate this, but I mean, isn't book rating so subjective anyway? One day I might say this is a 5-star book, and then I go back and read it next week and I'm just not in the mood for it and I think it's terrible. It's so hard to, accurately say what a book is worth or if it's good or not, because it's so subjective. But this one just didn't work for me, even though it had so many really interesting topics. So if you've read it and think I should read it again, let me know. I am trying to be more open to reading books a second time, because for the past few years, I read a book once and I'm like, never touching it again, I'm done, next one. And I'm going to try to maybe read a couple more in the next few months a second time to see if I get a different opinion. So if this is one that I should try again, let me know. But I just am not sure. And for a book filled with information, here's another nonfiction. I read Coffeeland, One Man's Dark Empire and the Making of Our Favorite Drug by Augustine Sedgwick. And I thought this had a lot to say. This is following coffee production, specifically, it's kind of broad, but it focuses mostly on El Salvador and how coffee really changed the agriculture and the exports and everything there. And it talked about this man, his name was something Hill, and he kind of set up a plantation there and how he kind of created a lot of the coffee empire from there. And it was very interesting. As a non-coffee drinker, I feel like I lacked a little of the stakes. I mean, because the book was very broad. Not only did it focus on El Salvador and coffee exports, it also talked about coffee's effects and coffee's aromas and coffee tasting and coffee judging. And I don't have a lot of a stake in whether coffee tastes good or how it is processed to taste the best. That's not super important to me because I don't drink it. But some of the world trade aspects were super interesting. Learning a lot about El Salvador was very interesting, and honestly just heartbreaking that imperialism, having these people come in and just tear up a whole nation for personal gain. It was very interesting in a world trade kind of thing. It was too broad. Honestly, this book just tried to be everything. Oh, somebody said coffee one time? Let's put it in the book. Let's put it all in. They talk about El Salvador, but then they're like, oh yeah, and this country, and this country, and this country, and oh, and this theory of energy, and this theory of calories, and this theory of what coffee does, and this theory. It was a lot of information, so it lacked maybe a cohesive narrative, but it had a lot of information, and so you get a lot out of it. So I thought that it was very interesting that way. One of the things that I found to be one of the most important takeaways that I got from this book was talked about towards the end, and the author was explaining that a lot of people, especially in capitalist societies, we think, okay, you need to work in order to buy food to eat, and that is not the case. You need to eat in order to be able to work, and that is a prerequisite, and we need to make sure that people have the food that they need. The author talks about how a lot of times on these coffee plantations, there will be work certain times of the year for the coffee harvest. And people say, oh, this is so great. Look, we're paying all these people so well for the amount of work they're doing. But because they have torn up the whole countryside to just be coffee plantations, there is no work the other part of the year, and people are starving because there isn't any other opportunities. And then, there's the whole other question of how can, these countries send people over, terrorize a whole countryside, change an entire landscape of a country, and then be upset when those people want to leave and try to find a better life. There's a lot that goes into this. I also liked how it also related it to sugar crops. I hadn't heard the the comparison of sugar back in the day to cannibalism. If you're eating sugar, it's causing, sugar, it kills so many people working to produce the sugar that you are basically eating people when you eat sugar. And I was like, wow, that is quite the comparison, but very, very effective. It was very interesting just looking at a lot of that, like world trade. And so I recommend this book. I think it's interesting. Are you gonna get kind of bored? Is it gonna be hard to pick exactly what you got out of it because it covered too broad of a range of topics? Yes, but there is so much interesting information that I think it's worth it. Okay, those are the books that I read this last week. A couple nonfiction, a couple fiction. I'll be back next week with a wrap up for the rest of March. I'm reading a couple interesting ones right now, and I'm excited to talk about them. So if you have any thoughts on these books, please let me know, and leave a comment down below. As always, I love comments and recommendations of new books to read. So I will see you all on the next one.